Everybody, thanks for joining. Looks like we still got some people trickling in, but like Megan said, my name's Matt Danner. I'm the CEO of Monolith Forensics. And just to give a little background on what we do, I think most of you probably know who I am already, but just so that you guys, if anybody's new, just so you understand what we do here, we are a software company that makes software for the digital forensics and cybersecurity and e-discovery industries. We have one commercial product called Monolith, which is basically um, you can think of it as we sometimes call it an operating system. Sometimes we call it a system of record for digital forensics, cybersecurity, and e-discovery teams. Uh, it's also known as like a case management system or project management system. Basically, if you're running a digital forensics team and you're using spreadsheets or you're using some software you don't like to sort of track and manage all the work that you're doing, things like tracking evidence, chain of custody, if you're looking for something to take really good notes in or help you produce narrative reports, forensic reports, things like that. That's what Monolith does. So if you have any interest in that, if you would like to see it or talk to us about it, just head over to the website, take a look, and just reach out. We'd be happy to set up a demo or even get you access to a trial so you can play with it yourself. Okay, so to get started here, like Megan said, we do these every 2 weeks. And to show how committed I am to doing these every 2 weeks, I actually have a flight at 12:30 in about 2.5 hours. So I'm at the Austin airport right now, and I booked one of these really cool, they're called Jabber boxes. So I've never heard of these, but I found them at the airport, and it's just this little, I can unblur my screen and just give you a tour if anybody's curious about this. It's basically this little coffin that's at the airport. And that's interesting. The text is like reversed because you're seeing the mirrored image of it, but this is actually backwards when I look at it in reality. But it's just this little coffin. It's pretty cool. And I booked it for an hour for this webinar. So if anybody ever flies a lot or travels a lot and you're looking for a private space to do meetings and stuff, this actually is really, really cool. So anyway, that's my level of commitment to these things every 2 weeks, is to even do these things at the airport so that you guys get some kind of content on Wednesdays. Okay, so what we're talking about today is 2 weeks ago, I did a presentation on forensic protocols, and it kind of made me realize, it kind of made me think, there's this whole idea of, sort of planning that kind of goes into the forensic work that we do. If you're in law enforcement or even the private sector, there are some cases or some casework that you work on that's pretty simple. It could just be something like, hey, we have a phone, we need it preserved, we need to export some text messages from it. Pretty straightforward, doesn't require a whole lot of thought. You know how to use Celebrite, you know how to use Axie, you know how to use all these mobile tools. You can just plug the device in, get your extraction, export the text, which is pretty simple, right? But sometimes you get something a little more complicated. It has a lot of moving pieces, a lot of moving parts, a lot of variables, a lot of different things to look at. So especially if you're in the private sector, things like ransomware cases, intellectual property theft cases, if you're working at a company and you do internal like HR investigations, you might have some fairly esoteric or specific circumstances that you're asked to look into. And it requires a little bit more effort than just, something like, okay, I just need to export some emails or I just need to export some text messages. There's a little bit more nuance to it, right? Where you have a specific scenario with some specific issue you need to help investigate. And that issue may intersect with some digital evidence that you need to look at, whether it's a phone or, an email account or a cloud-based account or a laptop or something like that. It could be Apple-based, could be Windows-based, could be a Google account, it could be a Microsoft account. There's all these different variables that come into play, and each of these systems, as we all know, have all these different artifacts and all these different ways of investigating different problems. So it's always good to kind of think of like, how are we going to plan this out, and how do I plan this out in such a way that I'm covering all my bases and making sure I'm not missing anything, making sure that that I'm covering as much ground as I can and putting a plan together, a sort of plan of attack before we actually, work a case like this. So in this video, I try not to do too many AI videos or AI presentations, but I do like to sprinkle them into these because I think this is going to be using AI to help with work is not only going to be kind of our future going forward, but also I think if you want to have some kind of competitive advantage or be able to compete in the marketplace as a professional in this industry, you're going to have to start getting used to AI. A year ago, I would be saying you need to start learning how to code. That was my big thing for the longest time. It's like, hey, if you want to be really competitive, learn how to write code, because it just basically ups your game all across the board when doing digital forensics or cybersecurity work for a lot of reasons. And I still think that's true. I still believe that to be true. But now we're entering this area where I think we have to start, getting very fluent in AI and how AI can help us be a force multiplier that's in the work that we're doing. And that's how I think going forward, to stay competitive in the marketplace as a digital forensics practitioner, examiner, professional, expert, cybersecurity analyst, whatever the case might be, you're going to have to really start using and understanding AI. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up Claude. In this demonstration, we're going to use Claude. You can also do this in, not necessarily in ChatGPT, but you can do this in Codex. What I'm going to demonstrate. So for OpenAI, if you want to use OpenAI, you need to use something called Codex. Codex has these tools built in that I'm going to show you in Claude. Claude has these tools built in by default. But I'm going to explain some of the concept of what we're about to cover so that you kind of understand the background and the history of it, and how I came to use these different tool sets to help. And then hopefully that will provide some context behind how to use these yourself. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to start with Claude. So the first thing I want to talk about is there's this concept in these LLM models now that's pretty common, that if you're not familiar with it already, it's something that's called skills. So skills. And what skills really are, skills are basically just they're basically just prompts that you're just packaging into sort of a semantic function called a skill, right? So the reason skills exist is because what happens, especially in right now, the AI industry like Claude and OpenAI, they're really, really pointed at the engineering sector of the economy. And so I know at our company, all of our engineers, including myself, we make heavy use of AI. We're writing lots and lots of code with AI. I would say 80+% of our code is written with AI right now. And most of our efforts are actually built into the infrastructure and planning phases of actually developing and writing code, where we're spending a lot of time just planning and designing what code we want to write and the feature sets or the bugs we're trying to fix. And then we give that context and information to an AI who then actually helps us execute the code. And then after that, we do some fine tuning where we come in with our engineering expertise and clean up some things or make adjustments to whatever code the AI has done. And that provides a fairly significant efficiency boost for our engineering team. But during that process, what companies like OpenAI and Anthropic have done is they're focused on that coding industry so much. They're trying to figure out how do we make this easier for engineers? How do we build stuff that makes it easier for engineers to write code and manage their coding process and their engineering process better? And one of those concepts they came up with is this concept of skills. And by default, if you open up Claude, you don't have any skills by default, but skills are usually accessed by using the / command. And you can see here, I've got a couple of skills already. So there's a skill. So basically, Codex and Claude automatically come with this skill creator skill. So this is kind of a little bit of inception, where the first skill that's here is actually a skill that helps you create a skill. And like I said, all these skills they're just a combination of it's either a singular prompt or a combination of prompts that you've pre-designed and pre-used. And so that when you use a skill, you don't have to come up with this prompt every single time you need to do the same work. If you're using AI to help you do something and you're using the same process every time, instead of prompting Claude, every single time the same way, just package it inside of a skill, and then you can use that skill anytime you want. And you can see here in prep for this webinar, I already created a skill here that's called Forensic Exam Planner. And so I've already gone through this and tested it to play with it. But what we're going to do is we're going to do this all over again. And I'm going to show you the process through which I've done this. So I'm going to go click out Skill Creator. And let's say I want AI to help me plan, just basically help me put a plan together that helps me decide the work that I need to do, help me do things like what artifacts I need to examine, what hypotheses I need to make, what things I need to think about during the examination, given the context. And we want AI to help us construct that plan so that we can have something that we can start working with. We can fine tune it. We can use it to our advantage. If we package this process into a skill, then every time we do this planning, it becomes a very simple thing like this, where you just invoke the skill and then you give it some context around the case that you're working on, and then it helps you plan it. Now, I know some of you are thinking, right? You're probably thinking, well, I don't want to tell Claude or Anthropic all the details about some case that I just signed an NDA over, or I have a confidentiality agreement in, that sort of thing. That totally makes sense. For this to work, you don't have to give any specifics to Anthropic or Claude. It doesn't matter. You can generalize the details. You can anonymize things. You can make things, you can find a balance between being specific enough and general enough to where the AI has enough information to help you plot out a plan. You don't have, like, for example, like we'll build a skill first so I can show you how it works, but then we can come up with basically a pseudo scenario where we'll just I'll just come up with a fake scenario with non-specific details and non-specific names, and it'll still help us create the project plan that we want to use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invoke the skill creator, and I'm just going to give it some details to say what I'm trying to do is like, help me create a skill that will where I can provide some context around a digital forensics examination that I need to conduct. The skill should take in that investigation, context, details, and current working knowledge to create a plan. We're going to say a plan in Markdown, because Markdown is these LLMs are really good at putting stuff together in Markdown, and it renders nicely when you want to generate an actually nice formatted report. But you can also tell it to put it into a Word document format if you want to do that as well. It just depends on how you want to do that. I'm also going to add this: when invoking the skill, please relentlessly ask questions about how the plan should proceed based on my provided context. And then additionally, I'm going to say the plan should include specific tasks that need to be completed with specific forensic artifacts, logs, or other metadata that should be reviewed and examined. So we'll start with something simple like this, and then we'll see kind of where this gets us. I'll also add the digital forensics evidence could include Mac OS or Windows devices, mobile devices, network data, let's say enterprise network data, or cloud-based accounts, including storage and email. Okay. So we'll submit that. And again, you can try this yourself. We may not get this perfect here in this webinar, but this is just basically the process that we'll start. And what Claude's going to do is going to take this information, it's going to plug it into its skill creator, and it's going to walk me through and probably ask me some questions to help me define this skill. Okay, so it's saying I already have this forensic exam planner, so it's fine. We'll tell it to make a new one if it wants us to piggyback off of that. Okay, so now it's asking me some questions. How should this new skill relate to or going to replace it? Okay, so this isn't something you probably have to do. We're going to do build a new skill. Okay. What's the typical output that you want? Plan. Okay. It's asking us, how do we want to organize the output files? We'll just do one plan for now. How aggressive should we're going to do relentless. So this is another thing that's really important in this LLM stuff. You can basically prompt the AI in such a way now where you can have it basically, what we're trying to do is we're trying to reverse how these LLMs tend to work. A lot of these LLMs, they tend to just kind of make a lot of assumptions and kind of decide on their own, like different, there's like all these different coin flips and all these different branches that it could take in decision making. It tends to just make those decisions on its own. So what we want to do is we want to kind of flip it in the reverse and make it to where try to get the AI to basically, anytime it comes to a fork in the road where there's some kind of decision it needs to make, we want it to ask us for input on that. We don't want it to necessarily decide for itself. So we want it to basically interview us about details, and then it takes that information and then populates a solid forensic plan. So here I'm going to say relentless, and this is why I put it in the skill prompt when I told it to create the skill. And now it's going to start building the skill and might have some more questions for us to complete the skill. And the idea is once the skill is completed, we'll then be able to invoke that skill, give it some context around an investigation, and then we can start building the plan. Okay, how should the references folders be organized? So we have a decision here. We could say by evidence source, by matter type, hybrid. I'm going to do matter type instead of evidence type. Okay, should the skill cover acquisition, preservation, or stay post-acquisition only? Let's do post-acquisition. Like we just want this to focus on analysis. We don't want it to, we could build a separate skill around collection and acquisition if we wanted to. I want this to just focus on just the analysis piece, because acquisition is kind of a different part of the process, has its own set of circumstances and nuances. We can build a separate planning skill for that if we want. Reuse plus add the above. Okay, we'll add some more. It's adopting some scenarios I previously had in the previous skill, and we're going to add a few more items to it. So basically, what the skill is, it's going to build a skill that has a lot of pre-baked scenarios, so case types, so things like intellectual property theft, ransomware, business email compromise, data exfiltration, and there's a few others in there that we already have baked in. But basically, it's building itself all this different context, and it's splitting. And I'll show what the skill data actually looks like. But it's going to put this skill together where it organizes it into multiple files, so that when you invoke the skill, the AI has the way to basically parse out these different parts of the skill and use it based on the context that you're giving it. So what that means is you can have one skill you can design skills that have very, very specific and narrow functions where it just focuses on a very, very simple process, or you can build a skill that covers like an entire workflow. Like in this case, we could have had it include the process for acquiring and collection of data, which you can if you want. In that way, it's like you invoke the skill and it'll start asking you questions about all the different data sources, the means in which you should collect them. And then it'll go into the analysis phase. So you end up getting a start to finish forensic plan. And so now we're just waiting for it to finish the skill. Hopefully this doesn't bug out on me, but we'll see. Hopefully this isn't my internet crapping out on me. Okay, that's not good. Attempt 8. So another thing I've noticed with these LLMs, they tend to sometimes have they will sometimes have temporary outages, or especially when they release a new feature set, they sometimes, those feature sets can be a little buggy. But that's okay. If you get like this, just let it continue working until it fails, and then you can just prompt it to try again, and then it'll usually just kick right back up. I guess what I can do is while that's running, I'll show you an example of a skill that I built earlier. And I'll show you what the skill set actually looks like once it's fully built. Okay, so it's working there now. Let me open this up in VS Code so we can actually look at it. In just a second here. Okay, so we're back onto 2 more rounds of questions before redrafts. Okay, how should artifacts be referenced? Tool agnostic like your existing skill, or with tool callouts for mobile cloud where it matters? Yes, I want this to be tool agnostic. I don't want it to tell me what tools to use. I want it to tell me what artifacts to look at. Investigations often span multiple evidence types, laptop, N360i, mobile. How should the skill handle that? Multi-source by default. Always probe for corroborating sources beyond the primary source first. And then what else do you have? Let's do multi-source. Should the output plan use the same structure as your existing skill? Okay, we'll keep with the existing. I think it's pretty robust, but it'll give you kind of a full idea of what it's capable of. Okay, while that's thinking, let's switch over to what the skills data actually looks like. Give me a second here. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. Okay. So this is what the actual skill set looks like. So you start with the skill file, the skill.md file, and this is basically just a markdown file. And so this is the data that whenever you invoke the skill, this is what the AI, the LLM system actually pulls up. So Claude will actually read this here, and then this is basically just giving, this is like a pre-prompt that helps the AI understand like what its role is with the skill. So it's got all this stuff here where it's got some pre-designed scenarios, and you can see there's all these different other skill files here where it's basically separating the context and putting them into different files. And what the AI can do is it can read this skill file and based on the context that you've given it, it can then decide from this list, okay, which other markdown files do I need to review for additional context? So if you tell it that you're working on an IP theft case, it will then read this and know, okay, I should reference the IP theft plan here and go into it and actually use that to help, determine like how this plan should be drafted, and use this to ask questions of the user, like things related to the IP theft process. And if you tell if you're working with a Windows system or Mac OS system, it has these artifacts and things specifically for Mac OS and Windows, where it's got all this stuff plotted out. Now, what's great about this is you can have the AI, you can have Claude help you put this skill together. And what's great is you can go in and edit these and put any other context that you want into it. So, for example, this is a Windows artifacts file, so it tells the LLM what artifacts to consider when creating the plan. So you can review this and basically give it a lot more context about all the different artifacts that you might look at. So if you don't like the artifacts that the AI put together, You can add additional ones or remove some, whatever you want. And then this just becomes part of the skill. So right now we're just using Claude to help us draft the skill, but you can always go in and edit it and make changes to it however you want. And the location of where these skills are located for both Codex and Claude, on Mac OS, they're located in your root user folder. So let's check back in with Claude and see how Claude's doing on our planning. Okay, it's got some more questions for us. Okay, skill name, existing one, what we'll say is, we'll call it digital forensics plan. Should the skill save the plan to disk and use present files like your existing skill? We're going to say just produce the markdown inline and default to mount user data outputs. Okay, that's fine. Special handling cases. Your existing skill has a CSAM section. For this broader skill, should it also explicitly handle privileged comms and cross-border data custodian? Sure. So I'm kind of doing the kitchen sink here, so it's going to incorporate just a lot of stuff. And while that's cooking again, I'm going to show you where these skills actually live so that you know how to audit them. So right now, if you look, this is just my Finder window in Mac OS. And what I'll do is, this is normally what you would see, is you would see this stuff. But if you are in Mac OS or in Windows, both systems have hidden folders. So in Mac OS, you can hit Shift Command period. That'll show any hidden stuff. And what you're looking for is the .claude folder. And if I go in here, you can see there should be, I can't remember where it is. No, I'm like trying to remember. There's a section here where the skills actually go. And now I don't remember where they are. They're typically in here, but to give you an example, Codex, I'll pull up Codex, and Codex has a skills directory here. So right here in Codex, here's skills, and then I have a couple of skills in here that we use. So this is the location you would go in to manually edit these, and as long as you edit them, it basically changes them in place so that when you invoke them in Claude or Codex, they're automatically updated with whatever additional context you provided them. All right, let's head back over to Claude. Okay. So he's saying he's got everything drafting now. Quick recap. They're calling a digital forensics plan. Broader than the existing skill, post-acquisition only. References organized by matter type. Output, single consolidated. Plan file. Relentless interview. Special handling for CSAM, privileged, and cross-border jurisdiction. So now we're just waiting for it to actually build out the skill. And once it finishes, then it'll be ready to invoke, and we can review it and invoke it. But let's switch back to our VS Code representation of this skill for a moment. So we can kind of continue looking at it. Okay, so like I was saying, this was the previous skill that I had put together in preparation for this. And so, like, for example, this is one of the references files that it created for itself, where it's just putting a basic list of Windows artifacts together. And what's great is this is literally just a list of, it's a predefined list of typical artifacts on a Windows system that we might look at. And what it's going to do is, based on the context of the case information that you give it when helping you plan, it's going to use this list of artifacts to decide, okay, based on the context you provided, here's the data we're going to look at. This may not be a complete list. So if you think about it, this is just artifacts for Windows, but you might, think about creating different artifact files for different types of systems. So you have Windows and Mac OS, obviously, but maybe you should do one for Linux. And then also, let's say you're doing a Google Workspace investigation. Maybe then you need to create a series of reference files for that. And again, this is stuff that the AI can help you with as well. You don't have to necessarily do it by hand. But basically, by doing this, you're just building sort of this intelligence context for the agent, the Claude agent, to help you plan an investigation, a digital forensics examination. And what's great about this is if you're relatively new, or maybe you're going from law enforcement to private sector and you're not used to doing these types of cases, this system can actually help you decide like what things you need to look at. So it can actually help you do your investigation better by just simply like giving you extra things to think about or extra things to look for. Um, let's see how Claude is doing so far. Okay, Claude's still working on that skill. It's probably going to take a minute. Um, and so let's take a look at Mac OS here and see what it put together for this. So, it's showing us like the different locations for account authentication to show us different, where do we get different records about users that are authenticating onto the system. Program executions, putting us at unified logs, Spotlight, Knowledge C databases, file access and manipulation. It's pointing you at the sort of recent stuff in the shared file list, in a plist file. It's showing you trash metadata related to the DS store file, which is really useful. File system events log is super useful in cases like this where you're trying to understand how a user accessed your managed files. So, and also Spotlight. Spotlight's super useful for file metadata on Mac OS. So basically what this is demonstrating, and just to give you an idea, I didn't write any of this. This was stuff that the LLM put together. So what's really cool about this, it's also demonstrating that at least at a basic level, these LLMs are aware of the typical digital forensics artifacts that we like to look at and the different logging systems we like to look at. So what that means is this is a really good system to help you plan out these investigations. And also, let's say you don't have the LLM put the plan together. Maybe you put your own plan together, and then you can have the AI actually review your plan and basically give you suggestions on other things you should consider, other things you should add to the investigation, other artifacts you should consider. The one thing the LLM I think is going to fail at, if you're skeptical about this process or you're not sure if you're comfortable using it, one of the things that it might fail at is it's not going to be necessarily good at making connections. Like it's not going to like take all of your context and take all these artifacts and put together a chain of analysis that you need to do to make more complex connections about what the user is doing. It's going to give you these very like straightforward one-off log review systems or artifact review processes, but it's not necessarily going to say, hey, look at this artifact and look at this artifact and look at this artifact and review these different points of information from these artifacts, put them together to come up with sort of a more complex assessment of what a user may have done on the computer, or a complex assessment of what malware was doing on a computer. I don't think these LLMs are quite to that degree, quite to that level yet of chain of logic, but that's okay because that's what you're for. That's what our job is. But in terms of just getting this raw, like factual information about, where different artifacts are located, where they're at, what they represent, what kind of data they have, like this is the sort of thing that these LLMs are really good at. And you're, in this part of the phase, you're using it to basically help you get things to point at, to point at things that you want to look for and that sort of thing. All right, let's see how Claude is doing. Okay, Claude is still thinking about our plan. While that's thinking, what we can do is I can start a new chat and I'll pull in our forensic plan exam. This one that I already did, and we'll just prompt it and see what it gives us. I can say I have a new case, and we'll keep it simple, related to a sales employee, company A. He recently left to work at competitor company B. Company A suspects that the employee may have taken an important client and sales list with him to the new competitor. The employee had a Windows laptop and an Apple iPhone. issued to him by company A. These devices have already been imaged and are ready for examination. Now, typing this stuff out, you can also use the microphone too if you want to, but um, just to show how a skill like this will work, I'm just giving it some basic context. You'll notice there's no specifics here. I'm not giving it the person's name or the company's name or anything like that. It's just a very specific circumstance. And in my career, this is a very common thing that I've been asked or hired to investigate is, salesperson leaves a company or salespeople leave a company. They go to a competitor to sell a competitor product. The former company is always worried that they took a client list or took some kind of trade secret information or non-solicit type information that or information that may violate their non-solicit or non-compete agreements, that sort of thing. And what we're doing here is we're just helping, instead of us spending an hour or two writing out a full examination plan or investigation plan, um, we want to see if the AI can help us like create it for us in a shorter amount of time. So he's saying, the AI is asking, let me start with the custodian. Tell me about the employee. What was his role as seniority? How long was he at company A? And did he have local admin rights? Okay, we'll say he was at the company for 3 years. And he was an account exec. And we'll just say he did have admin rights. We can say that was a bad idea by the company, but that's the information we have. Also, whether he has given any notice that he was being investigated or those devices would be collected. We can say he was not aware of the investigation and not aware of the collection after he left. So again, we're giving it details. We're not giving him specifics. So we're not telling any names or places or companies or anything like that. And again, this prompt, it was set up to where it's going to relentlessly interview us for things. So it's now asking about the time window. 3 questions rolled into one because they're related. When did he resign? When was his last day at company A? Okay, we'll say last day was 3 weeks ago. When did he start at company B? If you know, he started at company B last week. How far back to? Let's go back 1 year for the investigation. So there, I told it last day was 3 weeks ago. I gave it an examination timeline of 1 year, so it already knows it's looking through May 2025 to April 2026. Okay, what tipped off the company? Did a specific client call? I'll just say company A suspects that company B has been collecting more of their clients recently and think this employee may be involved. So we've been in this webinar for about 45 minutes. So if you think about it, I've been spending this entire time explaining the process and showing how to build the skill. But if you think about the amount of time I've spent just prompting this LLM for help with the investigation plan, I mean, we've only spent a couple of minutes with it, right? Like 3 or 4 minutes. But what we'll do is we'll keep going until about 10:50-ish, 10:55, and see if we get this plan out by then. And then hopefully you guys can actually see what the plan looks like. Okay, we're going to say he had a Google account, Google Workspace account, and used close.com for sales CRM. Let's not worry about legal issues for now. Okay, we're going to say full disk EO1 image and full file system of iPhone. So the other thing I would probably do too in the skill creator and the skill prompts is it's asking me these questions. Let's see. No, just write the plan. You might want to add something to the prompt that tells it to be less verbose. Because another thing these LLMs are trained to do, they're trained to be sort of ultra nice to its users. And so that means it kind of over explains things and it kind of it just gives you a lot of stuff in return that you don't necessarily care about. So if you want it to be more brief, you can add to the skill prompt that it needs to be brief in its responses and not to, basically add fluff to the responses that it's doing. And so now it's actually drafting the plan. So hopefully this will be done fast enough so I can actually show it, see what it looks like. I have another plan that was already written yesterday that I can show if this takes too long. But while this is going, writing the plan, Megan, do we have any Q&A that we can answer while we're waiting?
We do. We had a couple of questions come in the chat. The first question's from Marissa. What level of Claude do you need to do this? Is the $20 a month plan enough?
Yeah, probably. The $20 plan is probably good enough for this because it's not, you're not consuming a ton of tokens. But really it comes down to, I would start with the cheap plan, the $20 a month plan, and just see how it goes and see if I think that'll do. I think that'll be just fine because you're not using it to write code. You're not using it in Claude code or anything like that. So I think the $20 a month plan will be just fine for it. Worst case scenario, if you find you're hitting some kind of limit or something like that, then you just upgrade. But I'd say try it on the lowest plan, see what kind of output you get. I think too, you got to check. I'm using Opus 4.7, which is Anthropic's top model. So this might be something else you want to consider too, is depending on the pricing system that Anthropic or OpenAI are using, you may have to kind of play with the different models that are doing this, and that might affect like the plan that you need for it to work long term.
All right, cool. And the other question we had is from Melissa. Is it only using the knowledge that it was trained on, or have you provided any resources for it to reference?
Yeah. So when you're building the skill, when you're using the skill creator, it's using data that it's been trained on. And like I showed here in the VS Code, in the actual skill related files, you can actually look at the different skills that the sort of context that it's giving itself. So like here, this file here, this is part of the skill set that we created for this forensic exam planner. And it populated this itself based on its own training data. And this is all just generalized forensic artifact information. So again, all you have to do is you can dig these out of your Claude system and basically edit these in place, just like we have here. And you can add or remove any artifacts that you want. You can add more context to these artifacts. You can make it more specific, or you can proofread these, make sure that you like what it's saying, make sure that it's accurate. But all this is just contextual information that when I use the skill creator, it created itself from its own training data. But you can add your own information to this as well so that it has it as part of the entire skill set. When it comes to the specifics around the investigation that you're doing, the Claude has no idea, has no idea anything about the details of your case or anything like that. So you'll have to, provide the sort of back and forth on the case itself in terms of like what needs to be investigated, while also being non-specific so that you don't accidentally leak like client details or anything like that.
Anybody else have questions while we're waiting for Claude to finish writing?
Yeah. And while that's finished, let's see if we can go to. So it's still building out our skill here, which is going to take a while because it's building a lot of different draft skills. But while we're waiting on that, we'll take a look at this system here that already has a plan. So here's a plan that I drafted yesterday using the same process. And we can kind of go through this and just see what it looks like. So here, again, it's being very verbose here. So this is something you might want to tweak when you're building a skill like this. But basically, here's the case summary. This one was, the scenario here was actually an engineer leaving as opposed to a salesperson. So this is going to be more about like, okay, did they take any code? Did they take any, intellectual property that's related to software or anything like that? So it's kind of creating the case summary here, giving us the outline. And then it also is building these hypotheses. So basically these different ideas that we need to be assessing based on the context, right? So, it's saying things like, did the custodian transfer company source code or any artifacts to a personal GitHub account? Is that something that may have happened? Because in this scenario, what we have is the company just telling us, hey, we had this engineer leave. He went to a competitor. And that competitor is a startup that just launched, a month or two ago, and they're building a competitive product to ours. And so they're really suspicious that an engineer left to this competitor company that's starting up a new product that competes directly with them. And they're worried that this engineer may have taken some source code or some intellectual property with them. So what the AI is giving us here in hypotheses are just some ideas that we need to think about assessing during the examination. So here it's like, hey, did he transfer any source code to a personal GitHub account? Is there any repo activity from his account during that window that we care about? Is there, what does his GitHub history look like? Is he still committing code? Is he not committing code? What does that look like? During the notice period, the custodian copied source code or related working trees to removable media. All right, so we're looking, did he use the thumb drive to copy any source code or data to it? And it's also giving us these null hypotheses. So if we see that there's no removable media at all, then we know that this H2 can't possibly be true, right? Because it's like, okay, well, we don't see him using any thumb drives or external media. So that kind of nullifies this hypothesis. So we know that's not something we have to worry about. But during the notice period, the custodian moved code or working trees through a personal cloud sync. So did he copy source code to a cloud storage account? Again, it's giving you the null hypothesis. The cloud sync clients on the device were configured with corporate accounts only and show no anomalous file population in the notice window. So that means if we wanted to nullify this cloud storage hypothesis, this data exfiltration vector, we're looking at the state of the computer and like, okay, is it even possible for him to do this? Like, can he connect an external cloud account to his device? Is this even a possibility? And so on and so forth. It's providing a few more hypotheses here for us to check. It's even defined some out of scope stuff based on the questioning it asked. And now it's breaking down the actual examination tasks and the different artifacts to look at. So establish a baseline and notice period boundaries. So we're looking for a confirmed timeline of which days the custodian actually used the device during notice versus days the device sat idle sets the window for all subsequent tasks. So basically what they're saying is, hey, get a baseline, like look at what his usage looks like on this device and understand like, what is his day-to-day? What does it look like when he's using this thing on a regular basis? Corroboration, this is getting a little in the weeds here, but if he works in an office that has recorded badge access, you could potentially look those. I would say an investigation like this, you don't do this until you need some really, really strong information about where the person is at any given time. You also have VPN and single sign-on logs that you can look at for more corroboration of like when the user is actually accessing resources. And what you're also going to look for is this task 2. It's basically saying, do some examination and look for any access to a personal GitHub account. Look to see if there's any evidence that he accessed or synced his personal GitHub account to the computer. And you're just looking for, again, this is evidence of maybe he copied some source code into his personal GitHub account from the company account. And so basically, so on and so forth, you can see all these different tasks. And it's not just giving you a simple task, it's giving you context information about, hey, here are the artifacts to look at. And here's why, here's what you're looking for and why you're looking for it. And it's giving you some corroboration details as well. So this is the point of the investigation plan, is that it's using AI to basically bolster, instead of you just sitting there and thinking up all the different things you want to look at, you're using this to give you more detail and more information on how to run your examination, because there could be stuff that it comes up with that you didn't even consider or that you didn't think about. And this can help fill in any gaps that maybe you hadn't thought of, or maybe your plan isn't quite as thorough. And you could basically use this to help you seed some ideas or some other theories or some other hypotheses to test for or to look for. And here I put this cool corroboration matrix together where it took all of our hypotheses and put them together in sort of a matrix here. We can see, like, here's the stuff to check for, and here's how to corroborate or nullify the hypothesis. And then it's giving you some other ideas here, some pitfalls to avoid. So some concepts to think about to, kind of understand if there's any, if you find something, are there any legitimate reasons for it, that sort of thing. So what's great about this is that this is the plan that it came up with based on a skill that I created. And all I did was I just gave the skill some basic information about what we're looking at. It asked me a couple of questions about the background of the case, and then it put together this forensic examination plan. Let's see if our other plan is ready to go. It is. So here's the sales exec plan that I asked it to put together earlier, and same process, right? It's now got our hypotheses to check. It's got our examination task for both the Windows system and the iPhone that we need to look at. And it's just basically given us all these different things to consider and means of attack for going through this examination. So I'll pause there for a second and see. We're basically at the end here. Were there any other Q&A stuff, Megan, or were those the only two questions we had?
We did have another question come in from Bob. He wants to know if Claude is the same in Perplexity, which I think is an AI tool, but I'm not entirely sure what it does.
Um, if it's the same in Perplexity, I think so, but it just, Claude, at the end of the day, Claude is just an LLM. The Claude desktop app is just an app that's basically wrapping that Anthropic LLM. So in this case, we're using Claude and we're using the Opus 4.7 model LLM. So all that Claude and desktop is doing is just a wrapper around that LLM. So that's technically what all these different systems like Perplexity, OpenAI, or ChatGPT, they're all just application wrappers around these LLM models, and they're just using agentic workflows to help you accomplish tasks. So you might be able to do the same thing in Perplexity. You probably can if you prompt it correctly. I don't know if Perplexity has the skill stuff. I don't know if it has the skills system built in. Maybe it does. Maybe it has its own version of it. So it's something to look into. But basically, if Perplexity has a chat system that allows you to directly converse with one of these LLM models, and that LLM has access to tool sets and agents that allows it to draft plans and draft documents, then you should be able to do it in Perplexity. But I haven't personally used it myself.
Alrighty. Any other questions? That's all I'm seeing for now. All right, I think that's it for questions.
Oh, looks like we got one more. Okay. Hey, Barry, yep, you'll get an email once we have this uploaded and ready to review. You'll get an email with a link to it.
All right, cool.
All right. Okay.
So thanks everybody for coming today. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Matt.
No problem. No, I was going to say the same thing. Yeah. Thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate it. We'll do this again in 2 weeks. And I have no idea what I'm going to talk about. I'll have to figure something else out for something in 2 weeks. But I was thinking about doing a Docker presentation in 2 weeks to cover some stuff in Docker. So hopefully this was helpful. The main sort of conclusion here, summary here is play around with these with ChatGPT or Claude and start playing around with the skills and see if you can put a skill together that lets you, help you plan these forensic examinations that you're doing. That's kind of the primary summary of this workshop.
Alrighty, thanks everyone for coming. Hope you have a great rest of your day and hope to see you again in 2 weeks.
Cool.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.